Yeah, I think the premise that we built our transformation program on was a desire to sort of go back to basics. So whenever we're confronted with a particular issue, instead of just looking at what we have and kind of tinkering around at the edges, we very much tried to go back to having a sort of blank sheet of paper and designing from scratch, asking the question, if we were to try and design this now, what would it look like and how can we achieve that? That inexorably leads you to quite a radical approach because you're often kind of tearing up everything that's gone before. So that inevitably has led us down a route of doing things that are very different from what currently exists. Part of that, of course, is about needing to be radical across the whole system. And so it was really important for us early on to get everybody involved in the kind of broader partnership, sharing a vision and all involved in the transformation of the services. We've built fabulous relationships with our third sector, with our health partners, and with a very broad range of other people who are all, I guess, engaged in kind of well-being in its broadest sense. So housing colleagues, people in environmental services. And that radical approach has caused some difficulties originally in trying to get people on board because it is a significant kind of culture shift. But I think having those kind of clear principles that underline our vision and bringing people on board in terms of sharing that perspective has enabled us to be both radical but also very inclusive in terms of who's working on the programme with us. Yeah, relationships are kind of very central to everything we've done, really. But it's not only having relationships, it's the nature of the relationship. So specifically when dealing with service users, I think adult social care 15, 20 years ago started to think about the importance of changing the power balance within the relationship. For far too long we'd been very prescriptive and very much a kind of professional gift model and gone in and offered our version of what we thought was the right thing to do without really listening to the people we were supporting. So going back to things like In Control, social care started to try and change the nature of that relationship. And I think we've taken that several steps further. In terms of the way that we talk about and plan and try to co-design services and other support mechanisms in a whole range of different ways, but also and crucially understanding our relationship with community, and that being again a fundamentally different relationship than the traditional one where organisations with the best of intentions went into communities, told them all the things that was wrong about them, often, you know, pointed to, I don't know, high levels of unemployment, poverty, poor infrastructure, and went in and fixed them by, you know, bringing in regeneration money and building stuff and backing off and assuming that the community had been well served. What we've begun to understand and try to put into practice is communities know what's best for them. They understand the issues that they face, but they also have a passionate and a deep and enduring relationship with their community. They don't particularly want to be told that they're in need. They want to be told that there are some issues that we can help them with. But it has to come from the community and it has to be something that they care about and something that they're passionate enough about to want to change. So relationships are vital. They have to be trust-based, they have to be genuine and deep, but they also have to reflect the relative importance of who's in the room, and that's almost always the people you're trying to support or the community you're trying to assist, having a lead role in how that relationship develops. And I guess the final thing to say is as well the relationship with your staff teams. We've tried very much to move away from a very hierarchical model of kind of manager and staff member. We've tried to distribute leadership far more broadly throughout the organisation, and we've tried to allow people to use their creativity and their experience to make decisions. The nature of that relationship has to be based on genuine trust and moving away from kind of blame cultures. So we are very much permissive in terms of trying to free staff up to be equal partners in the transformation programme. Yeah, probably the spine that runs through everything that we've done over the past 7 or 8 years. And it comes really from the guy who first developed local area coordination, a guy called Eddie Bartnick in Western Australia. And something he said very early on, he said that he'd realised that although there is space always for local flexibility, there's kind of, I think it's 8 or 9 core principles that run through local area coordination and that define it, and that if you don't stay true to, then what you produce will not be authentic and will not produce the same outcomes as local area coordination. And the other point he made, and it's so true, is that there's a need to recalibrate constantly. He says about every 5 years you need to go back and test what you're doing against those core principles, because systems will and have a habit of sucking things back within themselves. And for local area coordination to thrive, it has to be delivering what it's set up to deliver, and you can only really be certain that that's what's happening if you constantly go back and test yourself against those principles. So that was something that struck us as being a really kind of fundamental way of ensuring that what we set out to achieve, we stayed on course to achieve, and that our model across the whole system had that fidelity to those original core principles, which I guess manifest most clearly in terms of the vision that supports it. And it's been a really good and useful way of us constantly re-evaluating what we're doing and constantly challenging ourselves to make sure we're still behaving in the same way and we're still seeing the world in the same way and bringing forward whatever new development that's still faithful to that original vision. One of the other things about it that's really important and useful is you tend to then attract a lot of other people who are operating similar models and who approach you and say, look, we're here, you're doing this, we're doing that, would you be interested in kind of a conversation? And from that we've got some wonderful things like the wellbeing teams are out of a model from Holland called Buurtzorg. That's a model that has very similar core principles to what we're trying to do, so we were attracted to it. They approached us, that enabled us to redesign our home care offer to fit within that basic model. There's something called Open Dialogue in Mental Health, which is a Finnish model, again goes back 25, 30 years, has fantastic outcomes for people suffering from mental ill health. We come across that because the guy who's running the national health trial in the UK heard about local area coordination and approached us and said, this is a very similar model, but it's in mental health, would you be interested? So we were able to get our local mental health provider, ePut, onto that clinical trial. So the core principles act both as a way of ensuring you remain faithful to delivering your original vision, but also as a kind of magnet for other interesting initiatives that present themselves and you're able to incorporate into what you're doing to truly make it a whole system approach. Yeah, there's kind of two schools of thought really. I know lots of people are starting to doubt the validity of pilots because pilots tend to run a course, be successful or not, and then kind of disappear into the ether. And I kind of have some sympathy with that view. But again, one of our core principles, and again it comes from local area coordination, is to start small and to really kind of test the model as thoroughly as you can, work out any tweaks that you need to make, work out what's working best and enhance it. And only at the point at which you feel you've really given it a thorough test can you then consider scaling up. And that's what we've done in everything that we've achieved to date. Local area coordination, we started with 3 and very quickly moved to full coverage across Thurrock. We've now got 14. Community-led support, we took 1 team outside of the civic offices and put them to work in the community. Really again tested the model, really again found out what was working or what wasn't, and brought all of that back, and we're able now to scale up. So we've now got 2 teams, and then from April 4 teams will be out. So all of our social work assessment capacity will be out in the community working in that very different way. So I'm a big advocate of starting small and scaling up, but it has to be part of a plan to get you to a certain place. The idea of piloting just to test, if you haven't got a sort of follow-on implementation plan, does run the risk of being something interesting but that ultimately doesn't go any further than that phase. In terms of kind of nationally scaling up what we're doing, I'm always a bit dubious because the evidence that we've come across suggests that the moment it kind of becomes a national programme, you run the risk of it losing some of its kind of energy and significance to the local conditions. So I think what we've got to try and do is to work out a way in which this stuff can be governed centrally to give it the kind of critical mass it needs to become a new paradigm, but allows sufficient local interpretation and flexibility for it to be rolled out to suit the conditions that people identify in their local community. There's nothing worse than a top-down approach to implementation that just kills any real involvement or enthusiasm local communities have to take ownership. Sustainability and ownership, kind of different things in a way. I think sustainability tends to be about the extent to which you do with and not you do for. So the obvious and clearest example of that would be community development approach. Asset-based community development very much talks of working in collaboration with communities, going in and supporting them to find the things that they want to change, supporting them in that change, but very much, to use the local area coordination term, walking alongside people rather than doing for them, because it's only the extent to which they recognise the change as being something that they've driven and has had a positive impact that truly creates sustainability. In terms of a transformation programme like ours, it's absolutely crucial that we get ownership throughout the organisation and throughout our communities. But in terms of the kind of professional sphere, ownership throughout the organisation is absolutely the key thing. So we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that this isn't perceived as a good idea that's being kind of disseminated by a bunch of people at the top of the organisation. If it's a kind of hierarchical approach to transformation, then it will be sustained for as long as we're around. and there is a danger that as soon as we're not around, something else will come along and all of the good work will be undone. So we spent a lot of time over the past 12 months talking about how we can embed it so it becomes a cultural change rather than just a new way of doing things that's kind of fashionable this week. But we've also spent a lot of time thinking about succession planning and kind of trying to grow our own leadership that's coming through the organisation that is kind of steeped in this approach and this way of doing things, so that it doesn't become about one person or a group of people being around. It's kind of the way we do things, and it's in the DNA of the organisation and in the leadership and management approach.